Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know you've spent all morning listening to Mr. Broigo talk. I know you're hungry. What I need to tell you won't take very long at all. I don't like Alexander Cullen. I don't think he's a nice person. I don't expect you to like him. He's been a terrible husband to all three of his wives. He's been a destructive force in the lives of his stepchildren. He's cheated the city, his partners, his employees. He's paid hundreds and thousands of dollars in penalties and fines over the years. I don't like him. I'm going to tell you some things during the course of this trial that are going to make you like him even less. But this isn't a popularity contest. It's a murder trial. And the single most important provable fact of this proceeding is that Alexander Cullen was somewhere else when these horrible crimes took place. Now the state's going all out here. They've got this whole team here. They're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this case. I want one thing from you. That's it. One thing. I want you to ask yourself, is not liking this man reason enough to convict him of murder? Enjoy your lunch. We'll talk again.
What's that about? They're gonna hate me.
Listen to me like you've never listened to anybody before in your life. I'm gonna bust my ass to make sure they hate you. Because as long as you're out boning Melissa, you're not home killing your wife.
Why didn't you say something before?
And it doesn't look spontaneous. Oh, you got it now.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 314, The Devil's Advocate. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. That's the surprise you don't see coming. Because this is a podcast. You can't see it. You hear it. Totally different. Welcome to Verbal Diorama, whether you're a brand new listener, whether you're a regular returning listener. If you are, thank you for coming back to this podcast. And if you're a brand new listener, thank you for finding this podcast. But as always, I'm hugely grateful to everyone who takes the time to listen to this podcast. There are a lot of movie podcasts out there and a lot of them vying for your ears and for your attention. And I'm so grateful that you are here listening to Verbal Diorama for the history and legacy of The Devil's Advocate. Thank you for your continued support of this podcast. It genuinely means so much. And The Devil's Advocate is a movie that I've wanted to cover for a long time. And considering the time of year, we're starting to get into spooky season. To do a Keanu movie is always a special treat on this podcast. And this, in my opinion, is one of his best roles. Not many can hold their own against Al Pacino, but I think Keanu gives it a good shot here. And being honest, any actor in Hollywood would give anything to work with a legend like Pacino. Anything. Maybe even sell their soul for it. Not Keanu, thankfully, but vanity is Hollywood's biggest sin. And this movie asks us a simple question. What would you do to succeed? And like most things with this podcast, the devil's in the details. Here's the trailer for The Devil's Advocate.
A young attorney has the chance of a lifetime.
Milton Chadwick Waters.
We want you to come to New York. All expenses, first class, travel and lodging, you and your wife.
Oh my God.
he will enter a place of wealth and ambition.
We've got 40 partners vested at the moment. In addition to our corporate clients, we're currently representing about 25 foreign countries. He's got you scheduled for 15 minutes, so make the most of it.
John Milton.
Kevin Lomax.
Well, what's that like? One day you're putting them away, next day you're setting them free.
Takes a little getting used to.
Pays better, though, doesn't it?
Welcome to Babylon, Ma.
Speak of the devil.
A world of power and seduction,
Who's that with the senator?
controlled by one man.
I swear he can hear us. Hell, he can smell us.
He will make your dreams come true.
Want to come upstairs and...
Now?
He will grant your fondest wish.
I'm just warming my hands on your talent. You know what I see? I see the future of this law firm.
He knows your greatest fear.
Milton is into everything. Arms brokering, chemical weapons, toxic waste, money laundering for the Eastern Bloc. I mean, it goes on and on.
I don't like it here, Kevin.
And he knows the price of your soul.
Let's make a play.
Who are you?
Oh, I have so many names. I'm here on the ground with my nose in it since the whole thing began. God likes to watch. He's an absentee landlord.
Keanu Reeves,
He's always been there. I know that now.
Al Pacino.
As God sleeps late.
We will win.
It's my time now.
The Devil's Advocate.
Kevin Lomax, a talented defense attorney from Florida with an undefeated record, is recruited by a prestigious New York law firm after successfully defending a clearly guilty client. As Kevin and his wife Marianne settle into their luxurious new life, Marianne begins experiencing disturbing visions and psychological deterioration, while Kevin becomes increasingly obsessed with his work and the intoxicating power it brings. Kevin gradually discovers that not only is his charismatic boss, John Milton, actually Satan, but also his father, and Daddy Dearest has grand designs for Kevin to father the Antichrist. Let's run through the cast of this movie. We have Keanu Reeves as Kevin Lomax, Al Pacino as John Milton, Charlize Theron as Mary Ann Lomax, Jeffrey Jones as Eddie Barzoon, Judith Ivey as Alice Lomax, Connie Nielsen as Christabella Andreoli, Craig T. Nelson as Alexander Cullen, Tamara Tooney as Jackie Heath, Ruben Santiago Hudson as Layman Heath, and Heather Matarazzo as Barbara. The Devil's Advocate has a screenplay by Jonathan Lemkin and Tony Gilroy, was directed by Taylor Hackford, and based on The Devil's Advocate by Andrew Neiderman. Now, in 1990, Andrew Neiderman's novel The Devil's Advocate was published. The story of a talented lawyer, Kevin Taylor, who slowly becomes seduced by power and corruption at a high-end New York law firm ran by John Milton, who assigns him a high-profile case, and wouldn't you believe it, but his new boss turns out to be the devil. The movie is only very loosely based on the basic plot of the book. Much is changed, including character names. Kevin Taylor becomes Kevin Lomax, his wife Miriam becomes Mary Ann, and even her storyline differs, with Miriam in the book thriving alongside her husband's descent into craziness and enraptured by their new life, succumbing to all the temptations of this new life of luxury. The ending is also drastically different. But the idea of Satan practicing law, depending on your views of the American judicial system, there is an argument for it. And if you recognise the name John Milton, I wouldn't be too surprised. John Milton was an English poet whose epic poem Paradise Lost was the biblical story of the fall of man, the temptation of Adam and Eve by the fallen angel Satan, and their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And that was first published in 1667. Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost is charismatic, articulate, and presents compelling arguments for his worldview. He famously declares, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven," which aligns with the character's philosophy of self-empowerment and rebellion against divine authority. The film's version of Satan, like Milton's, doesn't appear as a traditional horned demon, but as a sophisticated, almost sympathetic figure who believes he's liberating humanity from God's tyranny. But also, speaking of the American judicial system, there's a strong argument for a certain high-profile celebrity murder trial and its controversial outcome being the key reason this movie got made. And I'm not saying his defense lawyers sold their souls to the devil to get to his not guilty verdict, but what they did was not necessarily say O.J. Simpson was innocent, but they persuaded the jury there was a reasonable doubt concerning the evidence and the NAPD's conduct in the case, which ultimately led to Simpson's acquittal. And this is because the responsibility of a legal defense team isn't to prove innocence or secure an acquittal, but to question the evidence brought by the prosecution in the case, to hold it to legal scrutiny, and to protect the rights of their client to a fair and unbiased trial. So, while we might question how a defense attorney can sleep at night when they know their client is guilty, they sleep at night knowing the state, as this is specifically in the case of the US court system, has played by the rules. Because even the most despicable of criminals deserves a fair trial. And a huge thanks to the Reddit Ask Lawyers thread for some really valuable information on the US legal system. But really, it's the same in most countries. You are legally entitled to a lawyer, and that lawyer is there to ensure fair treatment. And not every lawyer has sold their soul to the devil. While Paradise Lost is seen as an influence to the story, the legend of Faust, notably Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's, is the primary source. Faust is a classic German legend based on the historical Johann Georg Faust, an alchemist, astrologer and magician of the German Renaissance. Kevin Lomax embodies the classic Faustian bargain, trading his soul for worldly success, knowledge and power. Like Faust, he's a brilliant man whose ambition leads him to make a deal with the devil. The film explores whether someone can be redeemed after such a bargain, and Kevin's growing awareness of what he's sacrificed mirrors Faust's eventual recognition of his moral predicament. It explores the seductive nature of evil and questions whether humans are truly free to choose between good and evil when temptation is presented so appealingly. It's unsurprising that Andrew Neiderman would actively approach studios after his book's publication to pitch it to them for a film adaptation. The late Joel Schumacher teamed with producer Arnold Kopelson on 1993's Falling Down, and straight after that was picked to direct an adaptation of The Devil's Advocate, with a screenplay by Lawrence Cohen. It got so far into production that Brad Pitt was planning on being cast in the Kevin Lomax role. Sets were designed, and it would have included scenes of Pitt's character being chased through the different levels of New York's subway system, with each level being a level of hell in Dante's Inferno. Both Schumacher and Pitt would end up walking away when the script wasn't the best, and a suitable actor couldn't be found to play the devil. And then the O.J. Simpson trial gripped the nation, and courtroom dramas became a thing in the mid-90s, with Hollywood desperate to cash in on the nation's obsession with the judicial system. Warner Brothers hired Taylor Hackford to give The Devil's Advocate another go, with Tony Gilroy leading a script rewrite heavily inspired by Faust, but having the devil specifically not involved in any of the events. He could inspire people to do things, but not force anyone. It had to be of a person's free will. Hackford was a huge fan of method acting, and so all of his actors were encouraged to stay in character on and off camera. And obviously several things were changed in the film adaptation, including the fact that in the book, Lomax and Milton aren't related, but the movie added a plot element for Milton to be revealed as both the devil and Kevin's father, with Kevin required to consummate his attraction to Christabella, the literal beautiful Christ, and also his half-sister, in order to create the Antichrist, with Rosemary's Baby and The Omen cited as inspiration. Meanwhile, in 1994, Keanu Reeves starred in Speed, still one of the best action movies full stop, and a huge hit for Fox, making back 10 times its budget. After its first week in cinemas, Fox officially announced a sequel, and director Jan de Bont was contractually obliged to direct it. Its stars, Keanu and Sandra Bullock, were not contractually obligated to return. Bullock was persuaded to return with a reported $11 million salary and agreed financial backing for her passion project Hope Floats. Keanu was offered $12 million, but after finishing another action film in Chain Reaction, he didn't fancy doing another action movie. and also the script was a bit duff, because it's infamously about a cruise ship going out of control. So he passed on Speed 2 to make The Devil's Advocate, and he also took a pay cut to make The Devil's Advocate, over the $12 million he was offered for the Speed sequel. Al Pacino had been offered the role of John Milton 3 times, and he'd rejected it each time. Desperate to hook Pacino for the role, Hackford and screenwriter Tony Gilroy wrote a couple of scenes to show Pacino how the role would be tailored just for him. A devil who was sardonic, fascinating, charming, sexy and seductive, but not necessarily all-powerful, operating purely on the power of temptation, and lets humans choose ultimately what to do. Pacino would recommend Sean Connery and Robert Redford, but the production really wanted him, and so did Keanu Reeves, who obviously had signed on to the movie and really wanted to work with the iconic actor. Pacino would eventually agree, but the problem was the movie couldn't actually afford Al Pacino. So Keanu Reeves agreed to a further pay cut to ensure they could afford him, because any actor worth their salt in Hollywood would die to work with Al Pacino. Keanu would do the same thing on The Replacements to be able to work with the legendary Gene Hackman. To prepare for his role, Pacino watched William Detel's 1941 movie The Devil and Daniel Webster and studied Walter Huston's classic performance as Mr. Scratch, as well as Claude Rains' interpretation of the devil in Angel on My Shoulder and Jack Nicholson's womanizing Daryl Van Horn in The Witches of Eastwick. He also read Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno, which was also a visual influence for the film following the model of the Divine Comedy. The relatively unknown 22-year-old Charlize Theron, fresh off of auditioning for Showgirls, you remember she was turned down for that, but she also wasn't a huge fan of the extreme nudity. In this movie, she would have a nude love scene and a nude scene in a church, and she asked her mother for advice on whether or not she should take the role. Her mum encouraged her to do it by telling her, quote, "You should never let anything stand in your way of telling a true story," unquote. And it turned out to be Theron's breakthrough role, but she almost didn't get it for being too beautiful. Hackford auditioned her 4 times before offering her the role of Mary Ann Lomax. It wasn't a particularly happy experience for her at the start, though, because Taylor Hackford's method acting role was exhausting for her, with Mary Ann's descent into madness starting to affect her day-to-day life. Once she stopped method acting, the experience was much more pleasant, and she worked closely with Keanu to build up their characters' chemistry, because they're married for 5 years. She also talked to doctors, psychiatrists, and psychologists for advice on how to portray Mary Ann's nervous breakdown. The day they shot the church scene, the priest of the church greeted her and told her how wonderful it was that this character, desperately in need of help and love, goes to church to find it. And this was a movie that was filmed at real churches and real buildings in New York, and shooting on location in and around New York was a struggle. Principal photography began in late 1996, but within the first 2 weeks, the original cinematographer and both the first and second assistant directors were fired and had to be replaced. Andrei Botkoviak was brought on as the new director of photography. The short day-night hours were also blamed for the movie falling behind schedule, as well as a continually tardy Al Pacino. This was denied by producer Arnold Kopelman, who called Pacino the consummate professional who shows up to work when called. But there were rumours that Pacino and director Taylor Hackford didn't see eye to eye, with Pacino calling Hackford arrogant and claiming that he yelled at everyone. There were also rumours that Pacino wasn't happy with Keanu. How could that be possible? Pacino's publicist, Pat Kingsley, said the actor looked forward to seeing Keanu every day and that he was a joy to work with. Kingsley also denied that Pacino was late or had any contempt for Hackford. There was also the tiny issue of Charlize Theron working illegally in the US and being kicked out of the country during filming too. Luckily, that was resolved quickly, but the delays kept mounting. And within the industry, there were rumours that maybe the devil's work was at play on the movie. The production designer here was Bruno Rubio, and he designed John Milton's apartment, the design of which I'm going to come back to later, but the ultra-modern look of his office was inspired by Japanese and Italian architectural design, with the infinity pool added later in post, because that's not especially safe to have in real life. And it goes without saying that a character who displays a Trumpian level of opulence and of dubious character in Alexander Cullen was in fact modelled on Donald Trump, and Trump lent his penthouse in Trump Tower 5th Avenue to the production as Cullen's property. Writer Tony Gilroy would say on the WTF podcast, quote, "We needed the ugliest, most garish, horrifying real estate developer apartment you could possibly have, and Trump threw his apartment at us," unquote. The boxing match that Lomax and Milton attend was not a stage bout, but it was, in fact, a legitimate World Championship boxing match. It took place on the 4th of October 1996 at Madison Square Garden in New York, and it was between Roy Jones Jr. and Brian Brannan. Jones knocked out Brannan during the second round of the bout. The Jones-Brannan bout was supplemented with a WBA welterweight title fight featuring champion Ike Quarty defending against challenger Oba Carr. Carr was promoted by Don King, which is why the promoter appears as himself in the movie, because he was at the match that day. I'm not saying Don King is friends with the devil, but he was the most successful promoter in boxing history and allegedly stole money from all his boxers. He was sued by Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson, Tim Witherspoon, Terry Norris and Lennox Lewis, most of whom agreed on financial settlements out of court. So I'm not saying he's friends with the devil, but I'm also not saying that. Improvisation was encouraged on set, which led to Pacino singing and dancing to "It Happened in Monterey" by Frank Sinatra during a rehearsal. Hackford loved it so much he encouraged it for filming. He put that moment in the final version of the scene, but instead of Pacino singing, he dubbed it with Sinatra singing. Hackford would call the scene in its entirety some of the most incredible improv he'd ever seen in his life. But that's why you get Al Pacino in your movie. And considering Pacino is playing the devil, you might think some of New York's most iconic churches would be reluctant to allow a movie about the devil to film in them. But a number of them allowed it, including the Church of the Heavenly Rest, the outside of the Central Presbyterian Church, and the Manhattan Church of the Most Holy Redeemer. The whole of 57th Street was emptied on a Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. to film the abnormally empty street. The law offices of Milton, Chadwick and Waters were designed and constructed on the top 2 floors of the Continental Club in Lower Manhattan, although John Milton's round office was built on a soundstage. The trial scenes were shot in both the federal and state courthouses downtown, as well as in the municipal building on Foley Square. The New York shoot was finished by March 1997, and it moved to Florida in July 1997, starting at a small church in Gainesville, where the congregation and pastor were told it was a movie about combating Satan. Mrs. Howard's on Herschel Street, Jacksonville, an interior design business run by Jim and Phoebe Howard, was redecorated as the New York apartment. Jim Howard also appeared as the Lomax's interior designer. Late 90s visual effects can sometimes be a bit hit and miss, but I'd argue the majority of the visual effects in The Devil's Advocate hold up well, including the aforementioned infinity pool. All of the water here is CGI. The demon faces were created by legendary creature effects creator Rick Baker. At the climax of the story, after Kevin Lomax renounces his fate to conceive the Antichrist with his half-sister, he shoots himself in the head, and John Milton is transformed first into a younger version of himself that resembles Keanu Reeves, and then into an angel. To accomplish this, they used life masks of both Pacino's present-day face and his younger face, the latter of which they obtained from Dick Smith, who created it for The Godfather. They also made a life mask of Keanu Reeves, and Rick Baker, who did his training with Dick Smith, used all 3 to transform Pacino from his mature face to a youthful face to a blend of his own and Keanu's face, and finally into an angel, which is, of course, what Lucifer was before he was cast out of heaven. The visual effects budget for the movie was $5 million, and 20% of it was used for Milton's animated sculpture, where ballerinas were filmed naked in a tank of water next to a blue screen to create the flowing creation. The effect took 3 months to film and to add the effects in post-production. But I am going to come back to that sculpture. There is no obligatory Keanu reference for this episode because the whole movie is an obligatory Keanu reference. But I did just want to point out that one of my favourite songs ever is used on the end credits of this movie, and that is Painted Black by the Rolling Stones, which at one point was my ringtone. Back in the days when we had ringtones on our phones, nowadays it's no ringtone or just vibrate. So I love the fact that it's included in this movie. The original trailer, which I used earlier on this episode, isn't shy about informing the audience who John Milton actually is. And you could argue that as trailers go, it does kind of spoil the ultimate reveal of the movie. And when The Devil's Advocate released on the 17th of October 1997, it faced competition from another supernatural horror movie, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which beat it to the #1 spot by about $4 million. That 1-2 horror punch stayed at the top of the domestic US box office for 3 weeks before Starship Troopers came along, and then Bean jumped from 12th place to 2nd in its 4th week. Bean came out the same week as The Devil's Advocate and I Know What You Did Last Summer. It debuted at 10th, dropped to 13th, then 12th, and jumped 928.4% up to 2nd place. The Devil's Advocate stayed in the top 10 for 5 weeks. And on its $57 million budget, The Devil's Advocate grossed $60.9 million domestically in the US and $92 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $152.9 million. The original cut of the movie, though, the one originally shown in 1997, you can no longer see unless you have one of the first 475,000 rental copies of the movie that came out in 1998. And chances are you don't. Or if you do, you might be onto something that's fairly valuable. The sculpture in John Milton's office is very similar to a religious sculpture called Ex Nihilo, which sits just above the western entrance of the National Cathedral in Washington. It was so similar that it was judged to have violated copyright, as well as the original sculptor, Frederick Hart, finding it offensive that the movie used it in a satanic setting. And this religious sculpture is protected by copyright law. The movie was already shot and released theatrically before a lawsuit, Hart versus Warner Brothers Incorporated, came about. And the judge ruled that Hart and the cathedral had a substantial likelihood of a win at trial. And so a settlement was reached where Warner Brothers could release the 475,000 copies through rental stores, but thereafter they would need to create a new version of the film with a new CGI image replacing every shot of the sculpture for future releases. And they also had to attach stickers to existing unedited videotapes to indicate there was no relation between the art in the film and Hart's copyrighted work. Those copies had a large red message printed on the back of the case, reading, "The large white sculpture of the human forms on the wall of John Milton's penthouse in The Devil's Advocate is not connected in any way and was not endorsed by the sculptor Frederick Hart or the Washington National Cathedral, joint copyright owners of the cathedral sculpture Ex Nihilo in Washington, D.C. The DVD was reissued later the same year with sculpture now amended by CGI. A press release issued jointly by Warner Brothers, Hart and the cathedral stated, "There is no relationship between the sculpture in Devil's Advocate and Mr. Hart's Ex Nihilo." The press release also stated, "Neither Mr. Hart nor the cathedral endorses or sponsors or is in any way affiliated with the Devil's Advocate or the artwork in it." So the version of the Devil's Advocate that you have seen, unless it was the original 1997 version that was in cinemas, is likely going to be the amended version of that sculpture, which replaces some of the beings in the sculpture with wavy lines and all sorts of ridiculous things that look a bit weird, because the sculpture then animates itself a little bit later on in the movie. But fundamentally, it needs to be different to the sculpture that is copyrighted work. If you are interested in seeing what the sculpture looked like in the original theatrical release, there are several websites that note the differences and show screenshots of that original image. But it's safe to say that they've literally just covered it with some wavy lines and tried to get away with it that way. Rotten Tomatoes has a rating of 63% for The Devil's Advocate, with the site's critics' consensus reading, "Though it is ultimately somewhat undone by its own lofty ambitions, The Devil's Advocate is a mostly effective blend of supernatural thrills and character exploration. The film won the Saturn Award for Best Horror Film, and Al Pacino was nominated for the MTV Movie Award for Best Villain. Producers John Wells and Arnold Kopelman have attempted to make a TV series of The Devil's Advocate. This was back in 2014 with NBC. A pilot episode was written by Matt Then. The same year, original author Andrew Neiderman wrote a prequel novel called Judgment Day about John Milton's arrival in New York and him gaining control at the prestigious law firm. The author pitched Judgment Day to Warner Brothers as a TV series, but nothing came of either of these TV series attempts. In 2015, The Devil's Advocate was being developed as a stage musical in London, and a production company in the Netherlands developed it as a play, Advocaat van de Duivel, which debuted in spring 2015. Legal dramas aren't really my thing. Often the subject matters are too emotionally heavy, and to be honest, this movie doesn't shy away from how despicable humans can be. And not just the defendants like Lloyd Gettys, but also the legal team celebrating their win and his release, when Kevin Lomax knows his client is a disgusting guilty pervert. Getting the win is more important. Even Mary Ann celebrates the release of a sexual predator. And it does hang heavy over how I feel about these characters. Not that anyone is deserving of a mental breakdown, and Charlize Theron does incredible work with this character. But just an ounce of remorse or guilt at the outcome of the Gettys trial would have gone a long way to ingratiate these people a little bit more. But I guess that's the point. The devil only wants the win too. It is all about the corrupting nature of ambition, greed, and power, the gradual erosion of morality, and the seductive power of wealth and status. The legal system is the perfect cover in that respect. No one trusts lawyers for good reason. Even when faced with clear right and wrong, people can choose to turn a blind eye to protect their self-interest. There's nothing Kevin Lomax won't do to further his career, but arguably a career that's been protected and guided by a higher power. And this is John Milton's success story. Humans always have free will to choose their own actions. All he does is set the stage, show them what they could achieve, and prays to their vanity, the ultimate sin. Faustian deal-making and yuppie ambition are not all that different. John Milton is charming, charismatic, and interesting when he wants to enlist you to his cause, and Al Pacino delivers exactly what you'd expect of him. He chews the scenery like a pro and delivers the sort of rationalised rhetoric that would convince a young man drunk on winning 67 cases in a row to align with the devil's law firm. His devil is theatrical, over the top, delivering impassioned monologues about God, humanity, pressure, morality, and privilege. But it's really the demise of Mary Ann Lomax that's the soul of this movie. A woman consumed by her alienation, her grief over finding out she's infertile, and with Milton and his minions in her ear, commenting on her looks, her judgment, slowly making her less in touch with reality, and all the while keeping Kevin from her, encouraging his late nights and his feelings towards Christabella, while simultaneously making them both feel guilty. Her suicide scene is truly one of the most traumatic scenes in a movie that's full of traumatic scenes. Kevin Lomax's church-going mother sees Manhattan as a dwelling place of demons well before he does. He mistakes Milton's rooftop empire and its earthly pleasures for heaven. He even calls it Babylon, not realising he's already in the depths of hell. He has no end of opportunity, but only makes the right choice at the very end of the movie, choosing to die rather than help the devil win. Now, if you would like a podcast that goes more into the detail on the symbolism of this movie, as well as its links to Paradise Lost and Faust, I would highly recommend the Midnight Myths episode on The Devil's Advocate. It's from August 2022, but it's a typical example of why Laurel and Derek excelled. I listened to it back then, and I listened to it again when I was researching this movie because I knew they would have the excellent insight into the theology and mythology surrounding the movie. And rather just recycle what they said, you should go and listen for yourself. It's a podcast I miss very much. I know Laurel is doing great things with her new podcast, Sleep and Sorcery, but I wanted on record that I very much miss the Midnight Myth, and their episode on The Devil's Advocate is brilliant. Ultimately, though, Despite it all being a dream and Lomax being given the chance to do the right thing, he does. He rejects his client, knowing he will likely be disbarred, and leaves the courthouse with his wife, who's thankfully now alive and well. But on the way out is accosted by journalist Larry, who suggests writing a story about Lomax that will make him a star. And so the cycle continues, because Larry is Milton, and vanity yet again is Kevin's downfall. How many times has this cycle happened? Who knows? Maybe the devil can replay Kevin's life multiple times before he finally succumbs to his desires and conceives the Antichrist. Let's be honest, I think the devil has time. I love this movie, not just because I genuinely think Keanu is great in it and holds his own against Al Pacino, but I love how you walk away and really think about what you've seen, because the ending seems like a cop-out until you realise it's not. Kevin Lomax isn't changed by what he's experienced, and the devil remains in control of his life. So really, maybe humans are the problem. If we're never going to change our destructive ways, we will continue to destroy ourselves. We can blame the devil all we want, but we are the controllers of our destiny. Not God, not Satan. Good people can be good without God, and bad people can be bad without Satan. But unlike Kevin Lomax, not all of us get a do-over. We have one chance. So let's make it a good one. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on The Devil's Advocate, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you want to get involved and you want to help this podcast grow, you could do several things to help out, all free of charge, of course. You could tell your friends and family about this podcast or about this episode. You could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. And also, you can find me and follow me across social media. I am at Verbal Diorama. You can like posts, share posts, comment on posts. You can even DM me if you wish. But the interaction on social media really helps other people in your network get to see this podcast and what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast, which is basically telling the history and legacy of all of these fascinating movies. This is episode 314, so if you are new to this podcast, there are plenty of other episodes out there for you to enjoy as well. So the next episode of this podcast is also a horror movie, and the best horror movies give us some social commentary along with our scares and gore. And while his story was fleshed out, excuse the pun, in the sequels, the original Candyman from 1992 gave us more than just slasher scares. It gave us a fascinating relationship at the core of the movie. It gave us the dulcet tones of the late Tony Todd, as well as the idea that urban legends may be based on more than just scary stories to tell in the dark. Let's try not to say his name 5 times though, just in case. So please join me next episode for the history and legacy of Candyman from 1992. Now, if you enjoy what I do for this podcast, or you simply want to support an indie podcaster who does everything on her own, if you have some spare change, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. You're under no obligation because this podcast is free and always will be free. But if you do enjoy what I do and you get value out of what I do, there are a couple of ways you can help if you have the means to. You can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon. All money made goes back into this podcast, paying for software subscriptions, website hosting, and new equipment. Huge thank you to the amazing patrons of Verbal Diorama: Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Ian, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Heather, Danny, Stu, Brett, Philip M, Zelos, Sean, Rhino, Philip K, Adam, Elaine, Kyle, Aaron, and Connor. If you want to get in touch, as I mentioned, if you follow me on social media, you can send me a DM. You can also just give me general hellos, feedback, or suggestions by emailing verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can also find my website, which is verbaldiorama.com. You can fill out the little contact form. I do really love hearing from people, and I do try to respond in a timely manner. So if you are interested in what I've said for this movie or any episode in the past, really, please feel free to get in touch. I would love to hear from you. And finally,
Let me give you a little inside information about God. God likes to watch. He's a prankster. Think about it. He gives man instincts. He gives you this extraordinary gift, and then what does he do? I swear, for his own amusement, his own private cosmic gag reel, he sets the rules in opposition. It's the goof of all time. Look, but don't touch. Touch, but don't taste. Taste, don't swallow. And while you're jumping from one foot to the next, what is he doing? He's laughing his sick ass off. He's a tight ass. He's a sadist. He's an absentee landlord. Worship that? Never.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, is that it?
Why not? I'm here on the ground with my nose in it since the whole thing began. I've nurtured every sensation man has been inspired to have. I cared about what he wanted, and I never judged him. Why? Because I never rejected him, in spite of all his imperfections. I'm a fan of man. I'm a humanist. Maybe the last humanist. Who, in their right mind, Kevin, could possibly deny the 20th century was entirely mine? All of it, Kevin! All of it. Mine. I'm peaking, Kevin. It's my time now.
Bye.
Movies you know.